One day after people. Now that the Last Supper has been served, in the over 100,000 grocery stores around the world where humans came to buy their ingredients, an eerie silence prevails. Automatic sprinklers keep the produce moist. But gone are the sounds of carts squeaking down the aisles and registers ringing up sales. Hidden among these shelves is one item that will last for thousands of years. But for now, everything appears appetizing enough to eat. And there are plenty of mouths to feed. Microscopic organisms and insects have already arrived. In fact, many of them have always been here. In the time of humans, small levels of bugs and animal parts were even allowed in grocery store food by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. 8 rodent hairs in a package of noodles. 8 fly eggs in a can of tomato sauce. 150 insect fragments in a jar of peanut butter. It was estimated that humans unintentionally ate 1 to 2 pounds of insects each year. Now, without humans to consume these products, insect eggs hatch, bacteria multiply, and animals ready themselves for an aggressive assault. Around the world, food has inspired architecture, large and small. At Randy's Donuts in Los Angeles, this whimsical building stands as a monument to mankind's love affair with sugary foods. At 32 feet high, the rooftop donut is one of the largest in the world. The recipe for this 20-ton treat? Rolled steel covered with concrete. But the rooftop icon clings precariously to its perch.
The donut isn't actually supported on top of the building at all. It's supported on 2 rods that go into the earth, and then the building was built around those rods. You have a very large, heavy object basically held up by a lollipop stick.
One week after people, power is out in cities around the world. At grocery stores, this means lights off and no more refrigeration. Meat and dairy foods require temperatures of 41 degrees or less. As the thermometer climbs, many items begin to spoil within hours.
There are 3 elements that speed decomposition: heat, water, and oxygen. The hotter the temperature is within a grocery store, the faster decomposition will happen.
Airborne bacteria and fungi accumulate on all dead organic matter. As these microorganisms feed, they secrete enzymes that break down the once living matter, making it easier to absorb and digest. The process of spoiling is just preparing a different kind of meal for the microscopic predators.
2 spoilage organisms common to meat, poultry, and produce are Pseudomonas and lactic acid bacteria. Pseudomonas creates the slimy texture on top of these products, and lactic acid bacteria is what produces the little bubbles and smells. If you consider a bag of whole chicken, within hours, spoilage organisms on the chicken would produce gas. The bag would become bloated with gas, and within a few days, the bag would burst.
In the produce section, fruits and vegetables are emitting another type of gas, ethylene. which causes them to ripen. As one overripe apple produces ethylene, it triggers receptors in the other apples to emit the gas. Soon, all the fruit is becoming overripe and quickly rotting.
Once the refrigeration fails, you're going to have sticky, rotten stuff everywhere. And that's certainly going to attract animal life.
The pungent odors send out a welcome call to the world of rodents. Rats actually have a better sense of smell than dogs. In fact, in 2006, experts began using rats to sniff out landmines in war-torn parts of Africa. Now, rats muscle their way into supermarkets and feast their eyes and noses on a 100-course meal. Hordes of insects also join in on the feeding frenzy. Fruit flies are attracted to the fermenting smell of overripened fruit. Blowflies are attracted to the smell of rotting meat. In 8 hours, each female lays 250 eggs, which quickly hatch into maggots.
If the blowflies can get into it, then you'll have maggots. 100 pounds of meat could be quite gross after a couple of days.
Mold also feeds on everything. The green microscopic fungi begin as airborne spores. When they fall onto damp, moist food, they produce chemicals that make the food break down and rot. As man's food supply becomes a feast for new creatures, "10 days after people." After more than a week of waiting for his master to return, this guide dog ventures out of the house. More than other dogs, he is accustomed to routine and heads for a place where he thinks he'll find people and knows he'll find food.
If there was a local coffee shop that they frequented or a local grocery store that they went to on a regular basis, the dog would probably start looking for the person in those areas. Your typical blind person with a guide dog is going to go to the same grocery store day after day after day, and the dog would be habituated to those places.
But with everything in the store rotting, has he arrived too late? Most dogs have hearty stomachs, which secrete hydrochloric acid many times stronger than humans. The acid kills most of the bacteria, including pathogens like salmonella on raw meat. While most dogs might chase after the rats, the guide dog steers clear.
Guide dogs in particular are trained to avoid dogs, cats, anything else. They're trained to ignore those things and tune those things out and do their job. If it were to encounter strange animals, more than likely it would try to just avoid those animals.
The grocery store will now be this dog's lifeline. But how long will this free lunch last? Three weeks after people, lactic acid bacteria has multiplied into the tens of thousands inside milk containers, which causes the dairy product to curdle and sour. The lack of artificial refrigeration has caused most butter to go bad. But there is one place on Earth where butter survives after people: deep underground in Northern Europe. Starting in the mid-19th century, peculiar wooden barrels overflowing with fatty substances were unearthed in swampy Irish and Scottish peat bogs. Archaeologists determined they were containers of butter from 300 to 3,000 years old, some still edible. Three months after people, grocery stores become tombs for culinary corpses. Fruits have shriveled up. Non-packaged meat has decomposed. Only bones remain. In the time of humans, this horrifying scene had already played out in one American city. In 1999, a Fort Worth, Texas grocery store went bankrupt. The owners decided to abandon the market, leaving everything inside. Within weeks, neighbors began to notice a horrible stench. 3 months after it closed, the city's Department of Environmental Management entered and discovered a gastronomic nightmare.
The smell was extremely bad outside, and we really don't have an accurate report about what it was inside because we always put people in protective gear before we went in.
Workers in hazmat suits and oxygen masks began the process of cleaning up the toxic mess.
It was extremely dangerous. We did not know exactly what type of bacteria may be in there. We knew that there were some potential disease issues. You saw mice, rats, anything that would live off of garbage or decaying matter is what you saw. And the report was it was so bad that you could not see the hand at the end of your arm. The flies were so thick.
Each aisle they turned down brought a new and nasty surprise.
Things like the apples and lettuce and the bananas that had already rotted, and you could see where those had been eaten or gnawed on. Several of the milk containers had swollen and exploded just because of the decaying gases. Well, the packaged meats looked like it hadn't been touched, but a lot of it was this grayish black goo.
Now, in a life after people, every grocery store in the world is its own chamber of horrors. Rats have moved from meats to dry goods. Their teeth easily rip through paper and plastic packaged goods, creating openings for other creatures to get in or out. In the time of humans, food was often manufactured and sealed with insect eggs already inside. Merchant grain beetles laid their eggs on nuts in the field. The eggs, too small to see with the naked eye, ended up in containers of nuts, or products with nuts, like chocolate bars, where they would sometimes hatch into larvae. The larvae become beetles like these, which now feed on rice, noodles, and cereals. Red ants nibble on dried apricots. Cockroaches check into a roach motel inside plastic containers filled with cookies. The plastic holds out moisture and oxygen to keep the treats fresh for months, if the pests let them last that long. And packaging isn't the only way food was protected. In the time of humans, urban legend claimed this famous snack cake was filled with preservatives that enabled it to last well beyond its expiration date of 25 days.
This snack cake has sorbic acid in it that will inhibit it from going moldy over time. Once the package has been compromised, it still has a few things going for it. It is made with mono and diglycerides and polysorbate 60. This helps all the ingredients inside kind of cling to each other and hold that moisture in so it doesn't get stale.
Experts had determined these snack cakes could still be edible after 25 years. One year after people, produce has almost completely decomposed in grocery stores. And after humans, some foods will disappear forever, like the banana. The most common and consumed banana in the world is a variety known as the Cavendish. Wild bananas originated in Southeast Asia and Africa. They had large, dark seeds. In North America, bananas were bred to be seedless, which made them appealing to consumers. About 100 billion Cavendish bananas were consumed every year. Each banana was genetically identical to the original Cavendish plant, brought from Southeast Asia to the Caribbean in the early 20th century. But this lack of genetic diversity left it vulnerable to disease.
So if you have a new strain of a pathogen and it infects one plant, it will also be able to infect all the other plants. Eventually, this Cavendish banana is going to disappear.
Two years after people, insects finish off the last of the dried goods. But many of these pests have evolved to rely on humans for food. So in a life after people, they are doomed.
In terms of stored foods, especially dried things like oatmeal, wheat flour, and so on, it might take them a year or two to actually work through all that material, and then there's nothing left for them. So they'll go extinct too. Stored product pests will be gone, pests of garden plants will be gone, crop pests will be gone because what they feed on is gone.
Canned goods still rest on shelves, protected from pests by their aluminum and steel containers. 2 years after people, most have reached their printed expiration dates. But the food inside some of them could remain edible for hundreds of years. Most cans are lined with a polymer coating. It prevents the small amount of sulfur present in most canned foods from reacting with the steel or aluminum, which would cause contamination. Still, in hot, humid regions around the world, canned goods can experience a different fate.
If you raise the temperature of the atmosphere around that can, maybe into 105 degrees, spoilage organisms that are not killed off in the canning process, called thermophilic spores, would actually begin to grow.
As they multiply, the thermophilic spores produce gas that builds up and eventually causes the cans to explode. "30 years after people." In these dilapidated places where mankind came to dine, Americans once consumed over 20 pounds of pasta per person per year. 1,400 million cups of coffee a day were once gulped down worldwide, and billions of burgers were served up annually. Any semblance of a prepared meal would appear to have vanished from the face of the earth, except in the case of freeze-dried food. Freeze-drying is a dehydration process. It removes 98% of the water in perishable food to preserve it and make it lightweight for transport in camping, war zones, and even outer space.
Freeze-dried foods can last hundreds of years. A freeze-dried food was recently tested in a university study after 30 years compared against fresh, and that food was deemed by consumers to be almost as good as the fresh stuff. That was after 30 years, absolutely will last 50 or 100 years. We just haven't had the technology long enough to test the theory.
Freeze-dried food may still be edible 30 years after people. But the grocery stores that once sold these products have quickly deteriorated. After decades of snow and rainfall, the flimsy roofs cave in.
Plant life would colonize the inside very quickly. The parking lot would become basically a green lawn first, then a meadow, then a forest.
"60 years after people, and memorials to human food are on the verge of collapse around the globe. In Los Angeles, rainwater is eating away one of the largest donuts in the world.
In the case of Randy's Donut, water is going to pool inside of that at the bottom of the hollow portion of that donut. So the base might fail first, and then the top of the donut would come down on top of it.
With its hollow steel structure corroding, Randy's Donuts crumbles. 4,000 years after people. No trace of a grocery store remains. Yet there is one 21st century item that could still be edible. Unbroken jars of honey are found scattered in locations where cities once stood. In the time of humans, archaeologists had found jars of edible honey in Egypt. One dated back to 1400 BC. Honey is a hygroscopic product. This means if it's exposed to air, it absorbs moisture, which can cause fermentation. But if sealed in glass, it remains eternally fresh.
Honey will last a very long time. It has low water activity, a low moisture content, and a low pH. 3 key things that help this product not to decompose over time. Given a glass jar of honey with a nice tight lid, it could last for 1,000,000 years. It would probably get a little bit grainy and crystallize, but it still tastes great.